49%. That is how much Boeing's stock price declined. Nearly half its value evaporated. But this is not the story of a startup that failed. This is the story of a company that won. Boeing won by every measure. Wall Street respects, cost-cutting, shareholder returns, financial engineering. And that is precisely what makes its collapse so unsettling. Once, Boeing was an engineering cathedral. Engineers ran the company. They built the 747, the 777 machines that defined an era. Then came the merger with McDonnell Douglas. Financial metrics replaced engineering judgment. Headquarters moved from Seattle to Chicago in 2001, distancing executives from the production lines. The soul of the company was traded for quarterly earnings. The crisis culminated in March 2019. The 737 MAX was grounded worldwide. Lives were lost, trust was shattered. But the deeper question remains. What happens when a legendary engineering giant trades its soul for Wall Street's applause? The answer is surprising. It is not about one bad decision. It is about a system that rewarded the wrong things. This is the story of how Boeing lost its way and why it matters for every company that worships the stock price. Boeing was once the undisputed gold standard of aviation. Its engineers designed the 707, the 747, the 737 aircraft that defined modern air travel. The company didn't just build planes, it pushed the boundaries of what flight could achieve. Every rivet, every wing curve, every system was a testament to a culture that worshipped precision and safety above all else. That culture made Boeing the dominant force in commercial aerospace for decades. But that dominance came at a cost. The merger with McDonnell Douglas shifted the company's DNA. Suddenly, financial metrics mattered more than engineering excellence. Executives who understood balance sheets replaced those who understood airframes. The headquarters moved from Seattle to Chicago in 2001, physically separating top decision-makers from the production lines. That distance wasn't just geographic, it was philosophical. The people who once walked the factory floor now watched from spreadsheets. The result was a slow corrosion. Engineering culture was systematically undermined by financial logic. Product integrity became negotiable. The 737 MAX crisis in March 2019 didn't emerge from nowhere. It was the culmination of years of prioritizing quarterly returns over quality. Boeing's decline into existential crisis was not an accident, it was a choice. But what changed when the balance sheets took over the blueprints? In 2001, Boeing made a decision that would reshape its identity. It moved its headquarters from Seattle to Chicago. The official reason, to be closer to financial markets and customers. But the real message was clear. The merger with McDonnell Douglas had already shifted the company's focus from engineering to financial metrics. Therefore, the move symbolized a new priority: shareholders over the factory floor. Executives no longer walked past assembly lines. They no longer heard the rivet guns or saw the mechanics at work. They saw spreadsheets. This physical distance created a cultural chasm. Decisions became abstract. Cost-cutting and stock buybacks replaced investment in quality. Engineers felt abandoned. Their voices were drowned out by quarterly earnings calls. Therefore, the very DNA of Boeing began to mutate. The company that once prided itself on solving impossible problems now optimized for short-term profit. This distance would later contribute to a 49% decline in stock price, nearly half its value, as safety failures and production crises eroded trust. How did this physical distance mirror a cultural one? Subscribe to uncover the hidden costs of corporate greed. The merger with McDonnell Douglas was not a union of equals. It was a takeover of culture. McDonnell Douglas executives brought a different religion, shareholder value above all else. Engineers had once ruled Boeing's boardroom. Now accountants and financiers held the pen. Therefore, the calculus changed. Every decision now passed through a filter of quarterly earnings. Product integrity became a line item. The new leadership saw Boeing's legendary engineering culture as a cost center, not a competitive advantage. They trimmed research budgets. They outsourced critical design work. They pushed suppliers to cut corners. The result was a slow, invisible corrosion, but the market applauded. Stock buybacks soared. The stock price climbed, yet the foundation was cracking. The 737 MAX was born in this new era, a plane designed not to meet a safety standard, but to beat a fuel efficiency target without requiring new pilot training. That decision saved money. It also planted the seeds of catastrophe. The merger did not just change Boeing's leadership, it changed its DNA. Financial logic now dictated engineering choices. The company that once built the 747, a plane that required a new factory and a new runway, now refused to design a new fuselage for the MAX. Too expensive, too risky, too slow. The cost of that short-term thinking, nearly half its stock value evaporated. The applause from Wall Street turned to silence. What were the first cracks in Boeing's foundation? Wall Street demanded quarterly earnings growth. Boeing delivered, but the price was its engineering soul. After the McDonnell Douglas merger, financial logic infected every decision. Executives prioritized cost-cutting over innovation. They launched massive stock buyback programs to boost share prices. Short-term profits became the only metric that mattered. Therefore, investment in new aircraft development stalled. Instead of designing the next generation of planes, Boeing funneled cash into repurchasing its own stock. This pleased investors temporarily, but it hollowed out the company's core competency. The engineering culture that once obsessed over safety margins was replaced by a culture that obsessed over quarterly returns. The result was a slow-motion disaster. Boeing's market value eventually collapsed by 49%, nearly half its worth. These numbers are not abstract. They represent the direct consequence of prioritizing financial engineering over production excellence. But the deeper cost cannot be captured in a balance sheet. The 737 MAX crisis was the symptom, not the disease. The disease was a system that rewarded financial metrics over human lives. Boeing's decline into an existential crisis in March 2019 was the inevitable endpoint of this philosophy. What was the human cost of this financial engineering? The 737 MAX was supposed to be Boeing's answer to a fuel-efficient future, but the design was rushed. The engineering culture had already been hollowed out. After the merger with McDonnell Douglas, financial logic replaced technical rigor. Therefore, when the MAX needed a new engine, Boeing mounted it higher on the wing. This changed the aircraft's aerodynamics. A software patch called MCAS was added to compensate. But the system was given extraordinary authority over the pilots. It relied on a single sensor. Cost-cutting had eliminated redundancy. Therefore, when that sensor failed, MCAS pushed the nose down uncontrollably. Fatal crashes followed. The world saw the result. A once revered company grounded its flagship product. The crisis culminated in an existential reckoning. Boeing had prioritized financial metrics over safety. The production lines stopped. Airlines cancelled orders. The company's reputation, built over decades, collapsed in months. But the deeper problem was not just a faulty sensor. It was a system that rewarded financial engineering over production excellence. Executives in Chicago, far from the factory floor, made decisions based on quarterly earnings. Therefore, the 737 MAX became a symbol of what happens when a company trades. The existential crisis that culminated in March 2019 was not a sudden failure. It was the logical endpoint of a two-decade drift. Boeing's engineering culture had been systematically undermined by financial logic after the merger. Therefore, the company no longer designed planes for safety and durability first. It designed them for quarterly returns. That is not a temporary setback. It is the price of abandoning core competence. Can Boeing ever regain its former glory? The question assumes the old Boeing still exists. It does not. The headquarters remains in Chicago, far from the factory floor. The leadership pipeline now rewards MBAs over aeronautical engineers. The 737 MAX crisis was a symptom, not the cause. The cause was a deliberate choice to prioritize financial engineering over production excellence. That choice eroded global competitiveness. Airbus now leads in deliveries and order books. Chinese and Russian manufacturers see an opening, but a path back exists. It requires reversing the logic that brought the company here. It means moving decision-making back to Seattle. It means promoting engineers to the C-suite. It means accepting lower margins in exchange for higher quality. Boeing has the talent and the brand. What it lacks is the will. The real question is not whether Boeing can recover. It is whether American industry can learn from this fall before the next one. What lessons does Boeing's fall hold for the future of American industry? Boeing's story is not an isolated tragedy. It is a blueprint for how financialization hollows out industrial giants. The same logic that turned Boeing from an engineering cathedral into a quarterly earnings machine has infected countless American manufacturers. When a company's primary customer becomes Wall Street, its real customers become obstacles. The 737 MAX crisis was the symptom, not the disease. The disease was a culture that rewarded stock buybacks over safety audits, that promoted MBAs over aeronautical engineers, that moved headquarters 1,000 miles from the factory floor. Therefore, the lesson is stark. Once you optimize for the share price, you inevitably optimize away the very excellence that created the share price. Boeing's near bankruptcy, its grounding of an entire fleet, its door blowout mid-flight, its bitter labor strike, its massive layoffs. These are not random failures. They are the predictable consequences of a system that treats production quality as a cost to be minimized rather than a foundation to be protected. The broader trend is clear. Across aerospace, automotive, and technology, the same pattern repeats. Engineering excellence is sacrificed for quarterly returns, and the bill comes due in recalls, crashes, and lost trust. But Boeing's fall is uniquely instructive because it was once the gold standard. If Boeing could lose its soul, any company can. Therefore, the open loop remains. Is this the fate of all companies that lose sight of their purpose? What happens when a legendary engineering giant trades its soul for Wall Street's applause? It loses its way, then it loses its customers, then it loses its future. The turning point arrived in March 2019. Boeing's 737 MAX crisis was not a sudden failure. It was the culmination of a slow, deliberate trade. The merger with McDonnell Douglas shifted the company's DNA. Engineers once ruled. Now financial metrics dictated every decision. Therefore, the headquarters moved from Seattle to Chicago in 2001. Executives no longer walked the factory floor. They walked the analyst circuit. Production quality became a cost to minimize, not a value to protect. The stock price soared, but the foundation cracked. When the crisis hit, the stock price declined 49%. Nearly half its value vanished. Boeing posted $14.6 billion in cumulative losses over 4 years. The applause from Wall Street turned to silence. The lesson is brutal but transferable. Financial engineering cannot replace production excellence. Short-term metrics destroy long-term value. When a company prioritizes quarterly returns over product integrity, it does not just risk a scandal, it risks its survival. Boeing's fall is a warning for every empire that mistakes profit for purpose. Another hidden monopoly is about to reveal its own fatal trade. One built on a single fragile assumption. This is the monopoly matrix. Stay curious.